you! Ready for a deep dive. Today we're tackling Stoicism with Epictetus's Enchiridion as our guide.
And this isn't just some ancient philosophy. It's like a handbook for navigating life's chaos and finding some inner peace.
Right, it's like having this pocket guide filled with these little nuggets of wisdom.
Mhm.
And Epictetus doesn't waste any time, he jumps right in with this idea. There are things we can control and things we can't.
And it seems so obvious, right? But think about how often you find yourself stressing over things you have absolutely zero control over. The weather, traffic, what other people think. Epictetus would say, why even bother?
It's like trying to control the tide. You can stand on the shore and yell at the ocean all day long.
But it's not going to listen.
Exactly, it's a force of nature, totally out of your control.
And just like that tide, there are things in life that we simply can't control. What we can control, though, is how we react to them. That's where our power lies.
So how do we actually do that? It's easy to say, but what about when life throws you a curveball? Like you break your favorite coffee mug? And speaking of which, Epictetus uses a really interesting example to illustrate this.
You're talking about the broken cup, right?
Mm-hmm.
It might seem kind of random, but he uses it to talk about bigger losses, like even death. He says that by accepting that change is inevitable, that everything is temporary, we can find peace.
It's like he's saying, you can't control if a cup slips out of your hand. Accidents happen. What you can control is how you react to it.
Exactly. He's not saying we shouldn't feel sadness or grief. Those are natural human emotions. But it's about not letting them control us. It's about choosing to focus our energy on what we can control, our thoughts, our actions, our responses. And that's incredibly powerful, taking control of your inner world when everything around you feels chaotic.
So we can control our reactions, not necessarily what happens to us, which makes you think about, desires. Because wanting stuff, especially stuff you can't control, that's got to be frustrating, right?
You're hitting on something really important in Stoicism, Desire. Epictetus talks about it a lot in the Enchiridion, how it can be a source of both joy and suffering.
Yeah, it's like a double-edged sword, right? Desire can push you to do great things, but it can also leave you constantly wanting more and never feeling satisfied.
Exactly. And that's where people get Stoicism all wrong. They think it's about, shutting down all your desires and becoming some emotionless robot.
So it's not about erasing desire. It's about, what, understanding it.
Yeah, exactly. It's about choosing your desires carefully, realizing that true happiness doesn't come from chasing things outside of your control. That's like, imagine going to this amazing banquet. Tables are overflowing with delicious food. You can enjoy it all, but you wouldn't just, hoard everything for yourself.
Right. That's some seriously bad banquet etiquette.
Right. And Epictetus uses this analogy to show the importance of moderation. Enjoy life's pleasures, he says, but don't cling to them. Don't let those desires control you. Because just like that banquet, life is temporary. And the things we want, they're fleeting.
It's like appreciating what you have in the moment, not getting too attached to it, which honestly is way easier said than done, especially these days when everything's telling you you need more, more, more.
Oh, absolutely. It's a constant battle.
Yeah.
But this is where Epictetus reminds us that real contentment, it doesn't come from having a ton of stuff or needing everyone's approval. It comes from within, from mastering your own mind, aligning your desires with what you can actually control.
So we've got mastering our reactions, being mindful of our desires. But what about dealing with other people? How do you apply these Stoic principles in your relationships, especially when not everyone sees the world this way?
And that's where Epictetus gets really practical. He says, just like you have control over your own actions, you also have a duty to play your part in life the best you can.
So whether you're a parent, a friend, an employee, whatever, you have this responsibility to act according to your values, even if others aren't.
Exactly. And that doesn't mean you have to go around giving everyone a Stoicism lecture. In fact, Epictetus would probably say that's not the best idea. It's more about embodying those virtues yourself. He even uses the example of, a child with a difficult parent.
Oh, right, where he says, it's not your fault if you have a bad father, but you can still choose to be a good person.
Yeah. He's challenging us to ask, how can I respond to this situation with integrity?
So it's about focusing on what you can control, your own actions, instead of trying to change someone else, which is probably good advice for any relationship, right?
Absolutely. It's recognizing you can only control yourself. And sometimes, the most virtuous thing you can do is walk away from a situation that's hurting you.
So we're talking about virtuous living and all, but how do you actually do it? It's easy to get caught up in the theory, but putting it into practice, That's the real challenge.
You're right. It's not enough to just read about it. And Epictetus actually warns against that in the Enchiridion. He says, don't get so caught up in intellectualizing philosophy that you forget to, like, actually live it.
Hmm?
He even lays out these 3 stages of philosophical study.
3 stages. Okay, now I'm curious.
So the first stage, it's all about action, putting the principles into practice,
Oh.
even if you don't fully understand all the reasons behind them yet.
So less talk, more action.
Exactly. Then, stage 2, you start to go deeper. You question why these principles work, what the logic is behind them.
Building a foundation for your actions, right? Not just blindly following rules, but understanding the wisdom.
Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing. Epictetus says there's a third stage where you can articulate all this, debate it, analyze it.
Mhm.
And he says a lot of people, especially the ones who think they're really smart, they get stuck there.
They're so busy talking about it, they forget to actually do it.
Precisely. And isn't that so true today? You know, everyone's got an opinion, they're debating online, but are they actually living those values? Epictetus would say, real change, it comes from within. It's about aligning your actions with your principles, living with integrity, quietly.
So if Epictetus could give us just one piece of advice, as we wrap up this deep dive, what do you think he'd say?
You know, when I think about the Enchiridion, I think his message is really pretty simple. Stop waiting for the perfect time to take control of your life. Stop overthinking everything and just start living by your values, like right now, today.
It's like he's saying we already have everything we need to be happy, to find that Stoic peace. We just have to actually do it.
Beautifully put. And who knows, maybe with a little bit of stoicism, we can all handle life's ups and downs a little better, find a bit more peace within ourselves.
I love that thought. And on that note, this has been quite the journey. To our listeners out there, I hope you're inspired to pick up the Enchiridion yourselves and see what gems you can uncover. Until next time, keep exploring and keep on diving deep. Ever get the feeling that, real wisdom, it doesn't come from a textbook, It comes from lives that have been through it.
Oh, absolutely.
And today's deep dive, well, it's more than just philosophy.
Right.
It's about a life, and a life that I think could even make the most, I don't know, diehard cynic kind of stop and think.
Yeah.
We're diving into Epictetus.
And when you say through it, you really mean it. I mean, talk about extraordinary circumstances.
Talk about extraordinary, born into slavery around 50 AD.
Wow.
Facing hardship that, honestly, I don't know how. Most of us, I can't even fathom it.
Yeah.
And yet this man becomes one of the most influential thinkers in history.
He really does. And it's all rooted in Stoicism, this idea that
It all comes back to Stoicism.
that real peace, right? It doesn't come from, controlling the world. It comes from controlling how we respond to it.
Mastering yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, so picture this. The Roman Empire, right? It's all gladiators and fancy villas.
Right.
But also, I mean, you got to think, there's another side to that coin.
Oh, absolutely. Upheaval, uncertainty.
Yeah.
This was a chaotic time for most people.
So it's like the Wild West, but with togas.
Exactly. And that's where Stoicism comes in. It offered this kind of haven from all that chaos.
A way to find stability.
Exactly.
And into this world, this crazy world, steps Epictetus, born not in Rome itself, but in what we now call Turkey.
Right.
And then through this wild twist of fate, he becomes a slave in Rome.
In the heart of the empire.
Right in the belly of the beast.
Yeah. And not just any slave. We're talking about, our sources say, he was owned by a man named Epictetus, who was very close to Emperor Nero.
Wow. So this is a powerful dude.
Very powerful. And yet this powerful man allowed Epictetus to study
a slave.
to study philosophy, which was unheard of, almost unheard of for a slave at that time.
So even before we get to his teachings, you can already see how Epictetus is an outlier. This is not your typical anything. It makes you wonder, did Epictetus see something in him?
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly possible, but there's this story about Epictetus, even before his teaching days, really illustrates how ingrained this Stoic mindset already was in him.
You're talking about that leg.
The leg, yeah.
I gotta say, reading that gave me chills. It's Stoicism 101, but in the most extreme way possible.
Yeah, it's definitely become a defining anecdote of Epictetus and Stoicism. So the story goes that Epictetus' owner, Epictetus, in a fit of anger, grabs Epictetus' leg and begins to twist it.
Oh, man.
Now, instead of pleading or getting angry back, Epictetus very calmly warns him. He says, "You're going to break it."
I mean, talk about keeping your cool under pressure.
Right. And of course, the leg breaks.
Oh.
And Epictetus' response,
Well, let me guess. He sues him.
no. He simply says, very calmly, I told you so.
Wow.
Which perfectly embodies that core Stoic principle that focus on what you can control.
Your reactions.
Your reactions, right. Not letting the external circumstances dictate your inner state.
Here's a guy, still enslaved, facing down brutality, and he's living the philosophy he'll become famous for.
It's like a premonition.
Yeah, like a premonition of the sage he's going to become. You know, you'd think the story just gets more, I don't know, like epic from here, right?
You think so?
And it does, but maybe not in the way you might expect.
Yeah.
Epictetus gets his freedom. But even that part, it's kind of shrouded in mystery.
Yeah, the how is a little fuzzy. But the fact that he did is just, it's remarkable.
It speaks volumes.
It really does.
Because think about it, right? Freedom after hardship like that, most people, I mean, I'd be gunning for revenge.
I'd be like, where's my chariot? I'm out of here. I need some grapes.
Exactly. The universe hands you a blank slate.
Right.
But Epictetus, he flips the script. He's not chasing, external power. He wants the power of the mind.
He chooses teaching. And not just teaching, but like as a whole way of life. This wasn't about, reciting some theories. He wanted to live Stoicism. He wanted to embody that inner freedom that he had already shown so powerfully.
Yeah, and the way he taught, I mean, it's fascinating. It's not what you'd picture, right?
No.
Our sources, they describe him using humor, using relatable examples.
Everyday examples.
Yeah. It's like he took those big Stoic ideas and he made them like tools, actual tools you could use.
Exactly. And that's why we're still talking about him, 2,000 years later, right?
Yeah.
He wasn't some philosopher stuck in, an ivory tower. He understood.
Yeah.
He understood the struggles of everyday people.
Yeah.
And he offered them a way to navigate those struggles with more, peace of mind.
It's like he was giving people a mental toolkit for life.
Exactly. And maybe the best known tool, the most useful, is this concept of the dichotomy of control.
Okay, so the dichotomy of control. He lays this out in the Enchiridion.
He does.
For those of us who need a refresher, what's the short version?
Okay, so imagine it like this. It's your pocket guide to Stoicism, like the Stoic Cliff Notes.
Stoic Cliff Notes. I like it.
It's this collection of his teachings. His student Arian compiled them.
Okay.
And it's packed with wisdom, guidance, all stemming from this idea of control, or what we can and cannot control.
Because he's not saying that we control everything that happens to us.
No, of course not.
Because that's crazy talk.
You'd be miserable, right?
Miserable.
You'd be a tyrant.
Yeah.
So there are things, right? He's saying there are things we can control,
Yeah.
our thoughts, our actions, our reactions to things. And then there's, everything else.
This stuff you just can't do anything about.
The weather,
Other people.
other people's opinions,
Mm.
the news.
That's a big one these days.
Right.
The news cycle.
So Epictetus argues that so much of our suffering comes from either trying to control those things that are utterly outside of our control, or just constantly dwelling, agonizing over the things we can't change.
Okay, but how do we apply that? Because it's easy to say that, but life, it throws these curveballs. What did Epictetus have to say about dealing with those moments when things really hit the fan?
And it's easy to nod along to that idea, right?
Everything.
Focus on what you can control when it's, I don't know, your coffee order is wrong or you're stuck in traffic.
Right.
But we're talking about life-altering stuff here. And for Epictetus, well, life was about to give him a masterclass in walking the walk.
Talk about irony, right?
Oh, yeah.
This is a philosopher who's teaching about acceptance, about controlling your inner world, and then bam, exiled from Rome. 93 AD, Emperor Domitian, not a fan of people who disagreed with him.
Power and philosophy, they don't really go hand in hand. It's like there's this pattern throughout history, right?
Socrates gets the poison cup.
Right.
Epictetus gets the boot.
It seems like independent thought, it was a threat to those in power. But
Right.
here's what I find so interesting. Epictetus, he doesn't just rage against it.
Yeah.
He doesn't let this one event, this external thing, just take over his whole world.
Right.
He packs his bags and he goes to Nicopolis.
Greece. So he doesn't just talk the talk, he lives it. And
Yeah.
I think that's what makes Epictetus so incredible. With this exile, it could have crushed him. But it's like this opportunity to really, really live Stoicism. It's like he's saying, you can try to silence me, but you can't touch this.
Exactly. And what's he do when he gets to Nicopolis? He sets up shop again. He keeps teaching. This wasn't a setback for him. It was just a change of scenery. And it highlights something really important about that inner peace he's always talking about. It doesn't matter where you are, your social status, what's happening around you.
It comes from within.
It comes from within.
It really makes you think, though, if it wasn't for his student, Arian, would we even be having this conversation?
Such a good point. Arian was devoted. He wrote down everything.
Yeah.
I mean, he compiled all those teachings into the books that we still have, including the Enchiridion.
Without him, I mean, who knows, right? It'd be like lost wisdom.
Lost to history.
Lost to history. So we've got this incredible, chain of knowledge passed down through millennia. And speaking of knowledge, let's talk about the big takeaways from Epictetus, the stuff we can actually, use in our own lives even today.
Absolutely. Well, we've got to start with that dichotomy of control.
Dichotomy of control, it's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful, but it's so simple, but so hard to do.
Yeah.
Right? And then there's this focus on virtue, this idea that real fulfillment, it comes from doing what's right, what's good, even when it's hard.
Choosing the tough path over the easy way out.
Yeah, and not just that, but also this idea of accepting fate, not in a passive way, but just acknowledging that we're not in the driver's seat for everything.
Yeah.
But we can choose how we react.
Be present, focus on what you can actually do something about, and the rest, well, you got to roll with it.
Yeah.
And do it with a little grace,
It's a practice. It's not, you don't just arise one day and you've got it. It's something you work on.
It's a lifelong journey.
Yeah.
And I think that's the heart of it, right? Epictetus, he wasn't about dusty old books. He was about living it. Living these ideas every single day, even when everything's going wrong.
He walked the walk.
He walked the walk.
Right.
Through some of the toughest stuff imaginable, and he still found a way to not just survive, but to thrive. So we're wrapping up this deep dive, but I think what we're left with is that Epictetus's life, slave to sage, it's a testament to what we're all capable